here we have a rational function, the ratio of two polynomial functions. We have x plus 3 over the trinomial x squared minus 4x plus 3. And the question wants us to discuss the undefined values. So the values of x that would make this function undefined, as well as make a statement about the domain of this rational function. So we take a look at this, and we know that when we have a fraction, we can't have 0 in the denominator. That's what would make it undefined. So we need to figure out what values of x would make this denominator equal to 0. When faced with a problem like this, the first thing you're going to want to do is try to factor your denominator. So let's go ahead and factor this. We have y equals x plus 3 in the numerator, and then this trinomial in the denominator can factor as x minus 3 and x minus 1. I needed two numbers that multiplied to positive 3 that also added up to negative 4. So x minus 3 and x minus 1 is the factorization of that denominator. Feel free to review some of the other videos on factoring if you're struggling with that concept. Now that we have it factored, we can see what values of x make the denominator equal to 0. Maybe it's obvious to you already. If it's not, actually go ahead and set your factors equal to 0 and solve. So we have x minus 3 equals 0. You can add 3 on both sides, and you get that x equals 3. And you can set this one equal to 0 as well. Go ahead and add 1 on both sides, and you get that x equals 1. So for what values of x is this function undefined? It is undefined for the values of 3 and 1, because those would make the denominator equal to 0, and we can't divide by 0 with that. So those are your undefined values. Now, if we wanted to go ahead and write that domain in interval notation, it's all real numbers except those, so we have to make sure we exclude those numbers in the interval notation. So the domain here would begin at negative infinity until our first issue, again working left to right as we build this interval, the first value that caused the problem is 1, and then we would need to resume from 1 to the next spot we had an issue, which is 3, in parentheses in the interval notation because we're not including these values, they're being excluded from these intervals, and then we must do another union to resume the rest of the interval, which is from 3 on to positive infinity. So that's a rather drawn-out notation to say the domain of that. Just basically says all real numbers except 1 and 3 with that, but that's how you would build that in interval notation if we were being consistent with some of the other notations that we've used for the domain in some of my other videos. So, long story short, where is a rational function undefined? Where its denominator is equal to 0. Factor it, use a quadratic formula if it's a quadratic, whatever you need to do to find out what values make that equal to 0, and you've answered the question.